Hi all and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to cover a super interesting data type that is namely arrays. Now arrays are used in many programming languages. In fact, I'd say most programming languages have arrays in one instance or another. So what exactly is an array? An array is like an ordered list and it starts with a zero index typically, and it's a great way of actually storing data in Solidity and in other languages. And so we're going to actually jump into the code and get started in with our arrays in Solidity. Now we're going to begin with the definition of an array. So how do you do that in Solidity? It's quite simple. First, unlike other programming languages, arrays in Solidity, you can only store one particular type of variable. So, for example, we're going to begin with a simple array of uints. Now, to begin an array in Solidity, we must use the data type followed by a square bracket. And then we're going to make it public so it is available to all, and we're going to give this an array a name of x. And here we can actually define our initial values that we want in our array. So 1, 2, 3, and 5. Now, what's worth noting as well is we have a choice of making an array dynamic or fixed. So in this case, we have a dynamic, which means we don't have a value in the initial square brackets. But let's say if we want to make this array fixed in length, we can put this 3 value in. And if we save this, we can see we don't get any compilation errors. And we have our array x. So to actually reference the first value, we use our zero index, which returns 1. To reference the second value, we return 5. And to reference the second value, we'd return 1, which returns 3. And for the third value, we use 2, which returns 5. Okay, fantastic. We can also do the exact same thing with strings. So we can have a string array. We can leave this dynamic. We can make it public. We're going to call this y. And we're going to pass an initial value of test. We can save this. As you can see, it compiles fine. And now we have our two arrays. One is a string and one is a uint array. So for our y function, we pass in our zero index, and this returns the value of test. Okay, now we've actually looked at how we initiate our arrays. What we're going to do is look at how do we add to our arrays. So for this, we're going to use a function. We're going to call it add. It's going to pass in a string. We're going to store this in memory, which means it only runs when the function itself is running. So underscore string. I'm going to make this public. And we're going to actually add to an array. We must use what's called the push method. So we're going to say y.push, and then in our brackets we put in the value we want to add to this array. So we're going to put in a variable here. Brilliant, and we're going to deploy this. We can see that our add function is present. It requires a string. So let's say I'm going to add the word foo. That works. And we can reference it here. Brilliant, and that has been successfully added. In a very similar vein, we can actually use a different keyword to remove a string. So we'll create a function, call it remove. Now instead of actually using the push method, we're going to use the pop method. So what the pop method, it actually deletes the last value that was added to an array. So an array of 3, for example, in this particular array here, when we can actually see it when it's deployed. Deploy contracts. Okay, we're going to add another array to our y, add another value to our y array. So we'll add foo again. We can show that this is present if we use 1. Then we're going to use our remove function, which has worked successfully. We're going to call 1 again, but this returns an error because the value is not there anymore, because we actually added our foo value using this function, but we actually removed it again using the remove function here. Okay, moving on. There is also some very useful keywords that we want to explore. So another really useful inbuilt method in Solidity is to actually find out what the array's length is. So for this, we can actually use first of all, we reference the array we want. So for this example, let's use x. And then we can see what the actual length of this particular array is. So if we save this, no errors. We deploy this function. We call the length function. Okay, let's actually make it return a uint. Delete this instance, we're going to redeploy it. Going to have a look and see what was returned. Decoded output, and this actually returns a length which is 3. So again, like the length function is inbuilt and it is super useful. So as you can see in our output, it returns the value of 3. Okay, brilliant. Now we're actually just going to, before we do that, we're going to try one more thing. As I mentioned before, that we have now made this array fixed, so it's fixed in length. But what actually happens if we try and add to this array? So instead of having our input as string here, we're going to have it as a uint. We're going to call it input. We're going to save this function. We're going to redeploy again. What actually happens if we try and add a uint to, actually this doesn't like it. Okay, so our function actually won't even compile. This is simply because we're trying to add a value to a fixed array. So we've set our array length to be a maximum of 3, but what this function is trying to do is add an additional value, which it can't do because our array length is already fixed. So Solidity is not even allow us to compile this contract. So if we wanted to actually amend this issue, all we'd have to do is delete this 3, which makes it a dynamic array. And now it actually compiles without errors again. So that's pretty much it, guys. What we're going to cover now is a really useful topic, and that is the concept of looping with regards to arrays. So we're going to create another function, and we're going to, no, we're not going to make it return anything. So it is a public array, public function, where we're going to use what's known as a for loop. So what a for loop does is it iterates through every single value in an array and perform some operation on them. It can actually be programmed to only iterate through certain values, but for this example, we're just going to have it iterate through every single value in our X array here. So to begin a for loop, we use the for keyword, and we're going to actually put the function parameters here. So when you're creating a for loop in Solidity, we need to define three different things. So first is what's called our iterator. So we're going to make this a simple uint. We're going to set it to 0. That is our first parameter. Our second parameter is the condition that we want to actually check to make sure the function still runs. So this is going to be I is less than x.length. And finally, we're going to say what exactly happens to our initial counter variable here whenever a function runs successfully. So in this case, we're going to just have it increase by 1. So to recap, our initial value is set to 0. And then it's going to check, the function then checks if this is true. And if it is true, it will execute. It'll execute the code that we have defined here in our curly brackets. And once it's executed the code once, what will happen is that it will add 1 to this particular value here. It'll add 1 to I, and then the code will execute again if this particular value is true, and then it'll add 1 to I again. So what this essentially means that it's going to run for whatever the length, amount, it's going to run 3 times because the amount of values in this array is 3. So if we only wanted it to actually run less times, we could manipulate these values. We might have it as 1, which means the code will only run 2 times. But for our example, we're going to have it only begin with 0 to match the amount of values in the array. So what we want to do here with this simple for loop is actually have it do some simple addition to each of the values in this array. So we're going to have it reference our first index using the I. So when we actually want to reference a particular value in an array, we use square brackets and then we use this index here. So we're going to have the first value of x, which correlates to 1. We're going to have it do some simple addition. So the exact same value, and we're going to have 2 added to each of these values in this array. Okay, so we're going to deploy this contract and we can see it in action. So we're going to have a look at our array again, just to make sure that nothing is unexpected. So that's perfect. And we're going to look at the final value, which should correlate to 5, which it does. Then we're going to actually call our loop function. And this says executed successfully. We'll see what's actually happened to the 5 value. You can see 2 has successfully been added to it. And we can have a look at the first value again. You can see that 2 indeed has been added to it. And that's just a simple idea of how we can actually loop through arrays and perform some simple addition. It's also possible we could do multiplication, we could do concatenation, we could do quite a lot of different things for different types of arrays. But that was just a very brief example to give you an overview of some of the functionality when it comes to looping and arrays. So guys, that is it for this video. We've covered arrays, we've covered the different types of arrays, we've covered dynamic versus static arrays, we've covered a little bit of how to add to an array, we've covered how to remove items from an array, and we finally had a bit of a look at looping with respect to arrays. So as always, if you found this video helpful, please do give a like and subscribe to the channel, as it really does help me out, and we're trying to grow as a channel and we're trying to grow as a community and really get some really useful, valuable information across. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much, and we will catch you in the next one.